MSW Media. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring our show. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting cleanup20 to 64,000.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So now it's cleanup on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be cleanup on aisle 45.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 200 of Cleanup on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. So the 200th episode on the 20th. I'm Allison Gill.
Yeah, and I'm Pete Strzok. The 200 on the 20th and 2024. It's like all those zeros after the Rudy Giuliani settlement that Shamos and Ruby Freeman got. It's just all these 200 episodes. Whew. And to mark that auspicious event today, we're going to go over the worst cabinet picks in the history of the United States. And then we'll pivot and talk about Trump's sentencing for his 34 felony counts, as well as updates on both the Fulton County and Arizona fraudulent elector cases, which, guess what, are both still going on. And there's probably a chance that some of those fraudulent electors might be current electors for Donald J. Trump as we roll into January.
He's like 8 or 10 of them or something like that. That's
great.
Bizarre.
It's a big party.
Yeah. And 200 episodes. Yeah, I think you came in. I think I looked it up. Pete. You came in at episode 109. So
almost, not quite half. Not quite half.
Almost.
But you've been there the whole time. 200 weeks crime.
Of cleaning up on aisle 45. Now aisle 45/47. And boy, these cabinet picks, we're going to go over them. We also have updates for you on Steve Bannon's We Build the Wall trial. That's still a thing. And we'll end with updates on Rudy's cases, as we like to do, as we're wont to do, ending with updates on Rudy. But first,
this is the best episodes.
They all end. There's always a Rudy update. He's being sued by 9,000 people. And rightfully so, right? So we'll end with him. But first, we have some new patrons to thank. And we've got a ton of new patrons and we have a ton of new listeners. So I just want to take a minute and welcome everybody. If you haven't been listening, if you're ditching cable news now, you're ditching corporate media and coming over to the podcasts, welcome. Thanks for listening. We kind of function like NPR here. Wednesday episodes are all
like
free.
The Saturday Night Live. Yes. Spicy. Yes. Pete, tell us about your balls.
Tell us about your sweaty balls. Such a great sketch. If you haven't seen the Alec Baldwin Sweaty Balls episode of Saturday Night Live, you need to watch it. But we want to thank our new patrons. And so basically, like I said, we function like NPR. Our weekly episodes are free to the public. But if you sign up to become a patron and you pledge and you support independent media, you support the podcast, you get the episodes ad-free, you get bonus content. Every once in a while we'll have Zoom calls where we do Q&As. It's a lot of fun. So I just want to extend that invitation to you and also just say thanks for listening. Either way, we're glad you're here. But here's a list of some new patrons that we got that we want to thank. The Dellingers, Karen Morgan, Deborah Morse, There's a Party in My Appendix and You're Invited, Mary Louise Babbitt, and Pet Shop Girl. And again, if you're a new listener, you get to pick whatever name you want and we read it on the air. So that is why we have stuff like There's a Party in My Appendix and You're Invited, which reminds me of Anchorman. Are you trying to say there's a party in your pants and I'm invited? Yep, that's it. And then he runs away. Also, okay, so now also watch this: the Saturday Night Live, NPR sketch, and Anchorman. But thank you so much to our new patrons. We couldn't do this without you. All right, let's go over Trump's picks this week, his cabinet picks and his staff picks. And I have to say, I'm all out of adjectives for the absolute garbage he's nominating for his cabinet and staff. And I want to be clear here. These picks are not designed to appoint people to govern. That's not the purpose. First of all, it's to own the libs. They're designed to own the libs, and they're designed to dismantle our institutions. A lot of these folks are authors of Project 2025, and there is actually going to be a whole consulting department dedicated to just taking a hacksaw to a federal civil service. So let's start with the worst of the worst, and we'll just go through this list. First of all, there's Matt Gaetz. He's been nominated for Attorney General, and this has caused probably exactly the drama that Donald Trump wants by picking him. Do you know what I mean? Like, with all of these people pushing back, and all of the at least half of the Republican senators are against this pick. I think Trey Gowdy went on Fox News and said, half of the Republicans in the Senate aren't going to vote for him. If you've lost Trey Gowdy, man, that's saying something. But he's a very divisive figure. I also think we should retire the word firebrand. I don't want to call him that anymore. But it's the chaos and the reaction is exactly what Donald Trump is looking for. He's a reality show host. He's a huckster. He's a con man. So that's what one of the main purposes of this is. We also don't know what kind of backroom deals were going on. I mean, he got onto a flight, I hear, Trump did, and within 2 hours had made the decision. And then Matt Gaetz resigned right before the ethics committee report on his sex trafficking a minor was supposed to be released. And now Mike Johnson is saying, well, we don't like to release congressional reports on private citizens. Really, Hunter Biden? But regardless, he's a private citizen now. And something is fishy about all that timing, other than the obvious, trying to squirrel out of not having that report released. But absolutely garbage pick. And there's no way I think he gets confirmed unless, of course, they do this thing called recess. They use the recess appointments clause. Yeah, Pete?
Yeah, that's right. The recess appointments provides for that if Congress is in recess, that the president can make appointments. Now, there are a bunch of, to cabinet positions without the advice and consent of the Senate. Now, there are a couple of provisions that are interesting. One is that, if there's a disagreement, if the Senate doesn't want to go into recess and the House does, that disagreement goes to the president to decide. So it frankly doesn't matter. And Mitch McConnell has said there are not going to be any recess appointments, but of course he's not the Senate Majority Leader anymore. So what he says, whether or not he's speaking for the entirety of the Senate, one, isn't clear, but two, it may not matter, because even if he says and the senators are all able to stand up and take a principled stand, if Mike Johnson says, oh, we're going to recess, and therefore there's this disagreement, the decision would go to the president. And of course, it's pretty clear which way that would go. There's some question about whether or not a senator would have standing to sue. And there are some prior decisions that, we need to get some smart constitutional attorneys on here. But I want to say it was a decision written by Scalia and joined by the now Chief Justice John Roberts, and I think Alito and Thomas, which indicated that the appointments clause was not designed to do what people are discussing. So if somebody had standing to get a case to take it to the Supreme Court, the people that you would most expect to support Trump are already on the record supporting the position that would not support Trump. So there's a lot out there. And then I was at a gathering this weekend, and somebody mentioned there's some question about whether or not recess appointments can actually be paid or whether they'd be unpaid. Now, I'm sure any number of donors would line up to give in-kind donations for these folks.
Oh, yeah. I don't think he's going to miss his $280,000 paycheck or whatever the frick it is. I mean, people don't work in the federal government for the money.
Yeah, and to remind folks, the main thing about Matt Gaetz is not only is he wholly unqualified in terms of his competence as, not being a federal prosecutor, not being, in my opinion, a particularly competent attorney to begin with, not particularly a competent legislator to begin with. Setting all of that aside, aside the fact that he was, doing nothing but becoming the most hated man in Congress for the last 6 years or however long he's been there. There is the very real content of that ethics report, which some of the attorneys of the people who have accused Matt Gaetz, one of the attorneys at least, is out in the media right now saying, yes, allegedly he paid for sex with at least 2 women, and that there are witnesses to him having sex with a underage against some gaming table or something like that. So there are things like, again, these having spent the entirety of the Trump administration, and even before that, all these supporters talking about Pizzagate and how the Democrats are a bunch of pedophiles and harvesting the adrenochrome from the children and get rid of the pedos and the pedo. Matt Gaetz is an accused pedophile. He's an accused pedophile. And now this party who has done nothing but babble on and on and on about this nonsense story about pedophiles infiltrating every last little corner of our government, they're poised to put an accused pedophile in charge of the nation's Justice Department.
Yeah, and let's forget for a second that there's, conviction or not, right? Because
so let me just clarify real fast. When I say accused pedophile, he has not been, that is not an accusation from the Department of Justice. He has been investigated about allegations that he engaged in sex with a minor, not only sex, but trafficker. So just to be very clear for, anybody who's like, oh my God, that's defamatory. No, there are people who have claimed that. Media has reported that's happened. He has not been charged by the Department of Justice, but apparently in this House Ethics Committee report, there are all kinds of allegations talking about just that.
Yeah, and that was going to be my point. Regardless of whether the feds brought charges or not, you couldn't get a job as a bus driver if a congressional committee investigated you for child sex trafficking, and drug-fueled, ecstasy, cocaine-fueled, booze-fueled parties.
Just like Madison Cawthorn told us about. He was right all along.
Well, anyway, again, it's a shock and awe pick. It's designed to get us to talk about it in this way.
So why? Let me ask you this. Why? I agree that I don't think he's going to be confirmed. And so the question is this throw him out there as the sacrificial lamb. He's not really sacrificial because nobody expects he's going to be confirmed, but that gets everybody's eyes off the rest of these nominees that we're about to talk about, and they say, there's this big brouhaha about Matt Gaetz and big fight, and ultimately he gets replaced, and then everybody's too tired to fight about everybody else? Or do you think it is just like own the libs?
Well, I think he gets confirmed.
Do you really?
I think Mike Johnson goes on recess, and he does recess appointments for folks like Hegseth, who we'll get to in a second, and Matt Gaetz.
But including Matt Gaetz.
I think so. I mean, he would only be there until January 3rd, 2027. But I mean, why not? Unless what you're saying is that Trump knows he's not going to be nominated, and he only did this for owning the libs distraction drama. Then yeah, I could agree with that.
I think just like everybody gave Trump far too much credit for he's playing 4D chess. He's not playing 4D chess. I read the articles you were talking about where like the decision was made on the plane ride. Apparently Susie Wiles, his campaign manager and now incoming chief of staff, was in like a different room on the plane. And Donnie's talking to Matt and they're like, I got a great idea. However it happens that Trump just decides, oh, that's perfect. That's beautiful. I'll do it. And nobody really thinks it through. And then all of a sudden you got Attorney General nominee Gaetz. I don't know.
Well, we'll know soon enough. And we'll tell you all about it. We have Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, which is special considering her ties to Assad and Vladimir Putin, as she parrots Russian talking points like there being biolabs in Ukraine, blaming Ukraine for what's going on, for Russia's invasion, and so that basically walking the line that the Ukrainians are the bad guys in that conflict, and yes. So she's a former Democrat.
Yeah, and I think she wanted, at some point after the invasion, she said they should just bring, was it the aloha spirit to the conflict in Ukraine, and we should just all get along, even though Vladimir Putin, ruthless murderer, invaded, and there's no two sidesing what is going on in Ukraine. It is
How do you bring the
absolutely an
aloha
invasion of a
spirit
sovereign country by
to Russia?
an authoritarian regime. Period. Full stop. One who is the preeminent competitor strategically to the United States on the global stage. But, aloha. Hey, mahalo. Easy. Let's put on your little Hawaii shirt and let's all get. And the other,
I'm sorry, surf sucks in Russia though, right? Like, there's not a lot of
yeah. Charlie don't surf, right? Wasn't that the
beaches and
Apocalypse Now? I don't, and I think people don't like all these people. Like there's been no vetting, and again, we have yet to get to some of the people where it's apparent there's been no vetting. But if you look like Tulsi Gabbard's upbringing and some of her positions, particularly when it comes to Indian Hindu nationalism and some of the causes that she's alleged to have supported, there are things in there when you start unpacking it, you're like, man, oh man, this person should be nowhere near any of our nation's secrets, let alone the director of national intelligence.
Well, Donald Trump is not going to seek background investigations, background checks from the FBI. Yeah. He wants to do private things. And I think that the reason he's doing that is because when you do a background investigation with the FBI, generally those findings are handed over to the Senate committee that has jurisdiction over having confirmation hearings, and he doesn't want any of that stuff to go to the Senate. I think the Senate should ask the FBI for background checks. That's just my 2 cents. But moving right along here, we have RFK Jr., Health and Human Services. It completely denies. The thing that drives me nuts is that the mainstream media is saying he was always a vaccine skeptic. No, he is in defiance of medical science. It's really bad, and I don't. I mean, we could talk for hours about this particular, guy who's going to head up Health and Human Services. Is the same guy who sawed the head off a dead whale and strapped it to the top of his car. It's the same guy who found a dead bear cub and staged a bicycle accident so he could take it home and, I don't know, eat it. The same guy who, that's the brainworm guy.
Yes, alleged drug abuser, alleged.
He wants to take the fluoride out of the water. One of the oldest conspiracy theories in the world. Anyway.
Unbelievable.
He's our Health and Human Services Secretary. Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, and he has faced sexual assault allegations in 2017. Trump knew about this before he nominated him. So anything that you read that says, oh, Trump's blindsided by this new accusation and the incoming Trump administration transition team is now reconsidering their Hegseth. He knew about this. There was an NDA. There was hush money paid to this woman. So we have that. We went over that in detail on the beans. Susie Wiles, you mentioned, witness in the Jack Smith investigations.
Yeah, and sad part is one of the more sane voices of reason in this entire cabinet. So, which means she'll last about 7 months.
Mm-hmm. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. Okay.
How do you answer me this? Would you ever, if somebody spent years calling you Lil Marco and implying that you had, assuming you're a man, or, that you had a small penis, and just going on and on at every turn, demeaning you that way, would you say, yeah, okay, I'll swallow hard, literally, not figuratively?
Only in these specific instances, because this happens every single day.
Every single time. And it's almost like, I swear to God, as part of Trump's pathology, he loves that. He loves not only, it was like going after Ted Cruz's wife and rubbing his nose in that. And I'm going to take you and your manhood, your masculinity, everything, right? Everything you stand for in big Texan, big Texas senator. I'm going to take your masculinity. I'm going to take your family. I'm going to take your wife, and I'm going to just crap all over them and bring all of that into question and make you grovel. And you're going to do it. And he did it.
Yep.
And I swear that's part of his pathology.
Of course. We have Todd Blanche as the DAG, Deputy Attorney General. We have UN Ambassador Elise Stefanik.
Going back home to New York, Elise. Congratulations.
Never thought I'd miss Nikki Haley. We have Border Czar Tom Homan. He's a Project 2025 author. Secretary of the VA, Doug Collins. I can't tell you how little I'm looking forward to loud, angry, idiot Doug Collins privatizing the VA and cutting everyone's benefits. NSA Mike Waltz. That's pulling right out of the very slim majority that the Republicans have in the House. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum. That guy's about as exciting as watching paint dry. Replacing the amazing Deb Haaland. White House counsel William McGinley. Solicitor General. I'm actually kind of looking forward to this. This is John Sauer. And if you haven't heard John Sauer argue in front of a high court, he's terrible.
Well, and that's what gets me. Everybody's like, oh, he did a bang up. He got the Trump immunity decision out of the Supreme Court. It's like, no. That was John Roberts and Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito in the majority. That had nothing to do with Sauer. They talk about like misplaced causality. That argument, it was like, oh my God, please, will you stop talking and sit down? We won't give this to you, but stop making it harder for us to do it. I just, Solicitor General, that's
so I feel much better about our lawyers going up against John Sauer in front of high courts when all of these lawsuits start happening. Secretary of Homeland Security, puppy killer, Christine Nome.
They're eating the dogs. They're shooting the dogs.
Yeah, so she's going to be in
Corey Lewandowski's alleged buddy, wink, wink, if you know what I mean, allegedly.
CIA Director John Ratcliffe.
And remember, look, John Ratcliffe, for those loyal listeners who came over and followed you on the beans, I'm sure they know this. But for those of you who don't, I will recall a time where then recent Congressman John Ratcliffe was nominated to be the DNI and had to withdraw because he was so unqualified, so bereft of national security experience that they're like, you know what? No, I'm not. I can't. I'm backing out. And so what does he do? He goes and spends the interim period doing absolutely next to nothing relating to national security. But now, back in the seat as the CIA director, you know what nobody's really out there talking about? Oh, John Ratcliffe should step aside. He's unqualified to be CIA director. Guess what?
No.
If he was unqualified to be the DNI, he is certainly unqualified to be the CIA director. Yet here we are, and that's one of those things where you talk about like, I'm willing to guarantee this confirmation.
I'm kind of surprised it wasn't Tucker Carlson because he got turned down for a CIA job, and I thought maybe Donald Trump would pay him back by putting him in charge of the CIA, but we've got just as unqualified John Ratcliffe. EPA, Lee Zeldin. The FCC chairman is Brendan Carr. He's another Project 2025 author. U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton. By the way, that's who Barr wanted to replace Berman with a while back, but that didn't work out. But now he's going to get to be the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. And maybe, who knows, 30 years from now, he might end up being in Rudy Giuliani's shoes after being the former director, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I think it's hilarious.
Since we're 7-year-olds in the cafeteria, what does that acronym work out to? The Department of Government Efficiency?
Doge. And I have to say, I think it's especially hilarious that the Department of Government Efficiency is so far the only department having to be run by two people. Deputy Chief of Staff, Dan Scavino.
And the worst two, it's the buddy movie that nobody wanted. That's the two most insufferable frat bros who didn't do any of the reading before class, who are just going to talk over everybody with what they perceive to be the answer. That it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, he's the tweeter in chief. Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Stephen Miller. Deputy Chief of Staff for Legislative, Political, and Public Affairs, James Blair. Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications and Personnel, Taylor Budowich. That's interesting, right? And then Presidential Personnel Office is Sergio Gore. I was actually surprised with this PPO head. I thought it was for sure going to be Johnny McEntee. I haven't seen a job for Johnny McEntee yet, and that actually frightens me.
Yeah, there are a couple of names. And we'll do the where are they now names at the end of this because we got a few more to go. But yes, agreed.
White House Communications Director Stephen Chung. That'll be great. He's going to be like, suck my dick. White House. That's going to be, sorry for cussing, but that's
I'll take out either that or the automated response to any question with like a poop emoji coming out of the White House. It's the auto response.
The poop emoji will be on the White House letterhead. I'm going to put that out there. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Okay. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright. That's what we have at the point of this recording. Who knows what's going to come next? We still have the FBI open. I mean, he does actually have to get in and fire Chris Wray.
Right.
I believe.
Which maybe he could preemptively, like I had, fuck him, a number of news outlets, including some of the most prominent news outlets in the United States of America, calling me last week, asking me if I would appear on panels in the evening to talk about what they believed were the imminent announcement of what I believe to be Trump's FBI director, which, as you pointed out, Chris Wray is still the FBI director, so it would have to be like, thank Chris Wray for his service. He's a deep state bastard. He's fired. But for whatever reason, I think there were rumors swirling that Trump was going to name an FBI director, and he didn't, which then leads me to what I alluded to, and you can both riddle me this, Dr. Gill, and you can respond with your own riddles. Where are Rudy Giuliani, Kash Patel, and everybody's favorite parking garage lawyer, Alina Habba?
Where are they, or where are they going to be?
Where are they going to be? Where are they not on this list of appointees or nominees?
Kash Patel, Alina Habba, and who was the third?
Rudolph Giuliani.
I don't think he's going to give a job to Rudy. And also, you don't have to call me doctor. Only Republicans have to call me doctor.
Sorry. Okay. I like to do it because it gives it a
very official sound. I know. We sound very official.
Not just official, of like authoritativeness. Alina Habba is going to be Junior Melania. Although there was somebody else that like is a drop dead doppelganger for Melania 30 years ago, and I forget her name, but she like popped up in some photos, either at Mar-a-Lago, and everybody's like, oh, look, it's Melania. It's like, oh, no, that's not Melania. And not the one where it was Melania, where she had the glasses on and disappeared and Elon was in all the family photos. There was somebody else, and I forget, it's an aide, and she, a tall, pretty brunette that everybody's like, looks like 1990 Melania, but that's
interesting. Well, I think I am worried about Kash Patel at the FBI, or at least maybe a deputy director or NSA. It's Kash Patel. I'm also for Alina Habba. Gosh, I don't know. Maybe just some sort of White House counsel. I mean, there's a bunch, right, in the White House counsel's office. I imagine.
Yes, there are a ton of those. And I would think like she wants to be, and it's the same thing. I look at her like I look at Stephen
Or maybe
Miller.
she'll be the attorney general when Matt Gaetz fails.
Only not quite so. I don't think. I think you might see some of the other people already named moving over there. I think she's like Stephen Miller. It is much more important for her to be close to Trump than it is to have some position in the department. Whether
some sort of White House advisor.
Right. Did Stephen Miller advocate to be, I want to be the secretary of this, that, or the other thing? I think for Stephen Miller, and I think for people like Alina Habba, it's much more important to be able to walk. Like what position did Kellyanne Conway, and by the way, where's Kellyanne Conway? But that something like the Kellyanne role, I can see Alina Habba sliding into, just put on a MAGA sequin jacket and be sassy. What's your title? I'm the Secretary of Sassy.
She's the
there was a Phil Hartman. Remember that Phil Hartman?
Yes,
who I
sassy.
love. It's sassy.
Yeah, that or Big
God
Sassy
bless.
Molassy.
Miss him every day.
Remember Ray Romano when he was his first day on the job, when he was an ESPN commentator? This is a Saturday Night Live sketch, and his catchphrase was "Sweet Sassy Molassy." Everybody was like, "What?" Yeah, no, I could see her being White House communications director, or like deputy chief of staff for sassy and vibes, right? Alina Habba. But we'll see. All right, we have taken up 2 entire segments on this show talking about these cabinet picks. They're obviously all awful. We will keep you posted on additional ones. But we do have to take another quick break. And we actually have a lot more news to cover this week. So let's do that, Pete. Let's put a pin in this. Come back to it. We'll obviously touch on this all about the bonus episode this weekend with additional picks and things.
We're swearing to tell you how we really feel about it.
Yeah, and we actually let some slip this in this public episode, which goes to show how
you got to do what you got to do.
We have more news to get to, so let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hey, y'all, privacy is not just a buzzword. It's a necessity, especially these days with this political climate. After a friend of mine was harassed because their personal information got leaked online, I realized how vulnerable we all are. With the recent election and tensions running higher than ever, protecting my personal information has become a top priority, and that's why I rely on Delete Me. They actively remove my data from people search websites, so my phone number and address and other details are not available to just anyone. And we want to thank Delete Me for sponsoring today's episode. As a person who exists publicly, especially as someone who shares her opinions online, I am hyper aware of safety and security. And it's easier than ever to find personal information about yourself online. All this data hanging out in the internet can have actual consequences in the real world. That's why I personally recommend and use and choose Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that removes your personal information from hundreds of data brokers online. Signing up for Delete Me is incredibly easy. Just let them know what personal information you want removed, and their team of experts handles the rest. They track down all your data on people search websites and get it removed, keeping your information safe. Plus, Delete Me sends regular privacy reports. I love these things. I get them in my email box. They show me what they found, where it was listed, what's been removed, and how much time I saved by having Delete Me do it for me. It is a hassle-free way to take control of your privacy. So take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting CLEANUP20 to 64,000. Again, text CLEANUP20 to 64,000. CLEANUP20 to 64,000. You'll be glad you did.
Hey, welcome back. We have more new patrons to thank, including the Simon School, Kara Rita, Paw Patrol Look Very Prosecuty, Brandon James, Laura Hui, I think it's Hui, and Holly Ocampo. Thank you so very much in this time more than ever as our mainstream news outlets seem and feel like they're failing us. Independent media is what is going to cut through all of the nonsense and bring you the truth. So thank all of you for being part of the team. And it's an honor to have you here with us. So one more thing before we're about to head to New York, but before we're in the airport, we're at the gate, we're about to get on the plane to New York, but I just want to go back real fast. To the nominated Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr. There's a photo on social media on Trump's plane that had Trump and RFK and Don Jr. and I forget who the other knucklehead was. And they're all around this little table and they've all got trays of McDonald's. And Don Jr. is holding up a little thing of fries and Trump's smiling, although his hair is all ganked up, and Elon's there. And RFK is sitting there like hesitatingly, this is Mr. Whole Foods, no vaccine, got to protect our precious bodily fluids. RFK is sitting there in horror, opening up his, I assume it's a Big Mac container. And all I could think of is every single time you're like running a drug op and you get up there against somebody and you're running an undercover against them, they'll like throw drugs in front of them and say, take the drugs, make sure you're not a plant, make sure you're not a Fed. Do that, bump that line, right? And then that was RFK in that photo in the plane with a fucking Big Mac in front of him and he's staring at it. And so that's my RFK story. For those of you who may or may not be into the drug culture and hip to these sorts of things, go watch The Wire. If not,
you have to tell me you're a cop. You have to tell me.
Yeah, pat you down. RFK's
you have to tell me you're the HHS secretary if you really are.
So let's get on the plane. Let's head up to New York. Let's talk about Trump's sentencing for his 34 felony count conviction. Reminder, the incoming president of the United States, yes, dear listeners, has been found guilty by a jury of his peers. Guilty of 34 felony counts, not misdemeanors, not jaywalking, not civil tax fraud, felony counts. 34 of them, not a baker's dozen, 34. Guilty earlier this year. As you know, those 34 felony counts were about falsifying business records to interfere in the 2016 election which seems like such a sweet, sweet, distant memory 8 years ago. He was set to be sentenced later this month, and Judge Merchan was set to rule on his immunity claims last week. But guess what, Allison? It's now been postponed.
It has. NBC Channel 4 in New York reports the following. New York Judge Juan Merchan, who presided over Trump's historic trial, had been scheduled to decide whether to toss out the jury verdict and order a new trial or even dismiss the charges altogether based on immunity. The judge's ruling was also expected to speak to whether the former and now future commander-in-chief will be sentenced as scheduled on November 26th. Trump's team wants the case dismissed. The prosecution says it needs time to evaluate next steps, but the court granted them a week-long delay to provide their position, and that's according to correspondence between parties. This was last week. Quote, accordingly, the people respectfully request the court adjourn the upcoming scheduling dates to afford the people time to assess these recent developments and set a November 19th deadline for the people to advise the court regarding our view of appropriate steps going forward. That's what the paperwork said. The defense also asked for a delay. Trump, as we know, won back the White House a little over a week ago, but the legal question concerns his status as a past president, not an impending one. And as you know by now, we record Monday. The show comes out Wednesday. So that means this deadline is Tuesday, the 19th. So if we hear anything new on Tuesday in time to update this episode, we will add it right here. This is Allison Gill with a breaking news update. DA Alvin Bragg has sent a letter to Judge Merchan saying he will not dismiss the 34 felony count against Donald Trump, but has asked Judge Merchan to hold off on sentencing Trump and to hold off on issuing a ruling on immunity while Bragg fights Trump's upcoming motion to dismiss the case. I will go over this in more detail on today's Daily Beans podcast, and I've written it up on my free Substack at MuellerSheWrote.com. We now return you to your regularly scheduled episode of Cleanup on Aisle 45.
And I'll just editorialize. He was found guilty. Sentence him. Period. The decision not to make a decision is a decision.
And then postpone his sentence.
Yes.
If needed.
Or it just kills me. Because the dude's gonna walk across the board.
Yep.
Period. So
yeah.
Now with that happy news, let's stay in Manhattan and give you an update on Steve Bannon. We will build the wall fraud case. As you know, the feds indicted Bannon, the feds, not the state of New York, the feds indicted Bannon for fraudulently raising money to build a wall on the Mexico border, but then use the money to fund his lavish lifestyle. You'll remember the post office cops arrested him, not the FBI, which make of that what you will. The post office cops arrested him on his friend Guo Wengi's yacht. But then Trump pardoned him on his way out of the door in 2021, and I'm sure we'll see plenty of pardons coming our way shortly. Then Alvin Bragg, the same DA who brought the hush money election interference case, indicted Bannon for the We Build the Wall fraud scheme on state charges, and he was scheduled to go to trial in a couple of weeks. Now, there was a hearing in court back on November 12th where prosecutors asked permission to introduce evidence that Steve Bannon was motivated by personal profit, which is a new theory for motive in the case. Quote, "We've always alleged that the money went to Mr. Bannon's organization," the prosecutor said, referring to Citizens of the American Republic. Prosecutors asked permission to introduce evidence of payments from Bannon's organization to his personal credit cards. Bannon's lawyer called it a quote-unquote smear and alleged the credit card payments were for Bannon's trip to the southern border.
Yep. And the judge then scheduled a hearing for just this past Monday morning to consider this new evidence, stating that it may result in a trial delay. And in that hearing, Bannon's lawyers say that they wanted a month or so to delay the trial so they could consider the new evidence and prepare a defense. Now, the judge actually granted a delay and allowed the evidence and set a new trial date for February 25th. So that's a couple of months delay. Mm-hmm. But she warned she will not be changing the trial date again. And by the way, again, I want to remind you, these are state charges. As of right now, as the law stands right now, Trump can't pardon these crimes. Everything has the caveat with, as the law stands right now, Trump can't do this or such and such. So he can't pardon this, at least, like I said, not with the current rules. We'll see what ends up happening. I wouldn't put it past him to try to figure out a way to pardon people for state crimes. We'll keep an eye on that for you as well.
Yeah, and this is, again, the good news. The good news in the sense of justice being served. This is not the state of Arkansas or Texas. This is although Texas, everybody forgets, Texas is like 48% blue. Texas, do not think of Texas as some hardcore red pro-Trumpy state, even though their elected officials all are. Texas is very much, I think, one of those states that in 4 or 5 years, we're going to be talking about in a very different way. But the point is, New York is not that. So whatever Trump may try and do, I think he may find in Governor Hochul and some other folks some resistance that he perhaps doesn't anticipate.
Right. But he will now have the full force of the federal government trying to undermine this case, like he did the Fulton County case by attempting to disqualify Fani Willis. Expect all of that kind of palace intrigue around this case. A judge once talked to a guy who said something about a Democrat looking nice in a tie one time, and they need to recuse themselves or whatever. Look for those shenanigans. We'll report on them. But this is, I type this as good news, bad news. Bad news, I wanted a trial December 3rd. Good news, more evidence gets to be introduced in the case. They just have to have a little bit longer to consider it and develop their defense. Because, of course, this judge doesn't want to hand them the ability to appeal this later by saying, hey, we didn't get enough time to consider this new evidence and develop our defense. Well, now they've got plenty of effing time, so they can't, they'll try, but it'll be a lot less chance of it being successful. So we'll keep an eye on this trial for you. I'm excited for it. February 25th, it's going down so far. We'll see what happens. All right, we have to take another quick break. Everybody stick around. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. We have more new patrons to thank. Thank you, Stephen Riley, Patricia Walzak, Cameron Stuber. I just bought a 1978 Cadillac from J.D. Vance. You might want to run a black light through there. And Chris Culkin. Thank you so very much for being patrons. We really appreciate it. And by the way, if you actually did buy a Cadillac from J.D. Vance, I want to know more about that. Send it in to us. Email it to us. All right, let's head over to Arizona. This is from Kyle Cheney and Betsy Woodruff Swan at Politico. The judge overseeing the criminal case in Arizona against some of Donald Trump's allies recused himself from the case Tuesday. This is last Tuesday, after defense lawyers accused him of anti-Trump bias. The allegations against Judge Bragg, wasn't I just saying that this is going to be happening in the Bannon trial too? Allegations against Judge Bruce Cohen stem from a revelation that he had implored white male colleagues to speak out against attacks on Kamala Harris's race and gender. Cohen also invoked resistance to the Nazis to describe the current political movement. Cohen scheduled a hastily convened courtroom conference for Wednesday to discuss the future of the case after one of the defendants, represented by a lawyer who also worked on the Trump campaign, said the comments warranted Cohen's removal from the case. But late on Tuesday, he canceled that hearing and just announced his recusal. Quote, while Judge Cohen is entitled to his political opinions and speech, this is attorney Dave Warrington and Michael Colombo on behalf of State Senator Jake Hoffman, his rhetoric and exhortation precisely mirrors the evidence of hostile partisan political zealotry at the heart of the motions to dismiss this case that had been languishing in the court for months.
Yeah, and in the court documents announcing his decision, Cohen defended his comments, but he conceded they could create concerns about his fairness. Quote, this court is also mindful of the appearances the subject email may have created for those who have interpreted the communication differently than intended, he wrote. Out of a commitment to justice, even the appearance of bias cannot be allowed to undermine the fundamental fairness that is extended by the court to all who come before it. Now, the development means that just as the federal and local cases against Trump are sputtering, the Arizona case, in which Trump is described as an unindicted co-conspirator, now also faces a disruption. In April, a grand jury indicted 18 Trump allies, including former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. And going back to our list of people, where's Mark Meadows on that list? Where is he coming back? Anyway, continuing, attorney Rudy Giuliani and former Arizona GOP chair Kelly Ward on charges stemming from efforts to subvert the 2020 election. The grand jury weighed whether to charge Trump in the case, but prosecutors led by Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays, a Democrat, persuaded them not to do so. Several defendants have moved to have the cases dismissed under a new Arizona state law designed to bar frivolous and politically motivated prosecutions. The judge who takes over the case will have to rule on those motions.
Yeah. And Warrington's role, by the way, in the bid to disqualify Cohen is notable because he's been under consideration by Trump for the job of White House counsel in his administration. Trump announced Tuesday night White House counsel job would go to William McGinley. Warrington has helped defend Trump in several high-profile cases, including from the House's now defunct January 6th Select Committee and from a civil lawsuit brought by members of Congress and police officers stemming from the attack on the Capitol. That's the Blasingame case. Arizona Daily Independent revealed Cohen's comments after reviewing August 2024 emails he sent to colleagues in which he rejected attacks on Harris as a DEI hire who would act inappropriately with generals in the Situation Room. He also mentioned Trump saying the former president had, quote, made reference to 2 historical female political figures and made reference to a particular sex act and how it impacted their trajectory. It's time for me to state my piece or be complicit with the depravity, he wrote in the email. So, I mean, okay. I don't think it's a reason to recuse. Eileen Cannon wouldn't recuse for it, but this judge is, because we follow the rules.
Yeah, and as long as we're going south, let's take a stop in Georgia, where state senator and co-conspirator Sean Still has filed a motion to pause his case, citing a state law requiring courts to stay cases against Georgia legislators while the General Assembly is in session. Anna Bauer at Lawfare writes, Still is one of the few co-defendants in Trump's Fulton County indictment whose case is not currently on pause as the Georgia Court of Appeals considers whether Fani Willis should be disqualified. But Judge McAfee is likely to grant Still's request for a pause, as he did during a previous session of the General Assembly.
Yeah, and she reported on that back then, too. He had asked for a pause, and he got it. So I don't see any reason the judge won't grant it here. And in other Georgia news, and this surprised me, the Supreme Court of the United States will not hear Meadows' appeal seeking removal of his Fulton County case from state court to federal court. The Supreme Court denied his petition to consider his appeal of the 11th Circuit decision that denied his request for removal. And you'll remember 11th Circuit, Judge Pryor, who's a good friend with Justice Clarence Thomas, wrote, "Hey, you're not a current federal officer, so this doesn't apply to you. This only applies to it doesn't apply to former federal officers. It only applies to current federal officers. And also, even if it did apply to you, it is not your job to oversee elections. Those are administered by the state." Now, the second part, I was like, that makes sense. I can see the Supreme Court agreeing with that. But I thought for sure the Supreme Court would reach down and snatch this up to overturn the first part of it, the fact that this doesn't cover former federal officers. But they did not. And that leaves the 11th Circuit decision in place. And so, I mean, I was actually pretty surprised by that, Pete.
Yeah, me too. And I think it shows, the tendency is to paint the Supreme Court as some monolith where they're, all in for Trump or, the majority is this way and there are only certain cases that are going to break through the majority. But this is one of those cases that cause you to say, or lack of cases, right? The not taking it up that make you think, okay, well, I don't have much of a question where some of the more kind of extreme members of the court are, but there might be some play. And certainly, I said, a bunch of episodes back that I think when Amy Coney Barrett declined to join the majority in terms of talking about whether or not presidential conversations could be introduced as evidence or whether or not those were immune in and of themselves, that there is some internal, it is not quite the monolith that we think. But it surprises me too. I'm pleased because I think it's the right decision. And I really do, all this goes setting aside the sort of juridical aspects of where the Supreme Court is. Think about Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows has been quiet, first of all. I mean, he has not spoken. And nobody in Trump world has mentioned him positively, negatively. It's almost like he's not that he's become an unperson, erased from everything, but he's just the person that isn't talked about. And so is that because they worry that Meadows is or could be potentially cooperating with Jack Smith? Although that's dead now. Doesn't matter, right?
That doesn't matter
gone.
now.
But so
maybe because he was,
I
they
don't,
were mad,
Yeah, but I don't, if they were mad, you would think they would, unless he had such extraordinary knowledge to be able to kill Trump. Yeah, you would have thought we heard about it. But just the whole Mark Meadows phenomenon of somebody somehow, like I know very few people who escape Trump's orbit without becoming either, continuing to be a sort of stooly angel subservient to, God Trump or the utter devil. Mark Meadows has kind of just gone off into the sunset. And it's a really interesting, you talk about personal dynamics, when you talk about the role he played at the end of the administration, when you talk about how he viewed Trump when Trump was almost dying of COVID up at Walter Reed, and then being the super spreader as he forced the Secret Service to drive him around in the tank, waving to people to show that he was a strong leader. Mark Meadows is an interesting dude. I don't understand it entirely.
Right. Yeah. No, me neither. We do have one more Georgia thing. I think we have and this is kind of taken out of the fraudulent electors case, the Fani Willis case, and we're kicking it over to some of the election cases that were going on down in Georgia.
Yeah, and this is Mark Elias, who has to be one of the busiest litigators in the, even going on. This is from the Democracy docket, and a little bit of background on the case. There was a lawsuit filed by 3 voters against the members of the Cobb County Board of Elections and Registration that challenged the board's failure to send mail-in ballots to an estimated 3,000 voters. Under Georgia state law, county boards of elections must send mail-in ballots within 3 days to any voter who submits a request before the statewide election. The absentee, or the deadline for the state, the absentee ballot requested deadline for the 2024 general election fell on October 25th, and every voter who submitted a timely request for a mail-in ballot should have received a ballot by October 28th. On October 31st, the Cobb County Board of Elections publicly announced that it had not timely delivered over 3,000 ballots and planned to send them via express shipping or overnight delivery the following day. Now, shockingly enough, the Republican National Committee and the Georgia Republican Party, stalwart supporters of the right to vote for every American that they are, well, they intervened to prevent Cobb County from extending its ballot receipt deadline. The court extended the absentee ballot receipt deadline to November 8th for all affected voters and ordered county election officials to notify those voters of the extended deadline. Fast forwarding a little bit, on November the 1st, Republican interveners appealed this case to the Georgia Supreme Court, and then on November the 6th, the Georgia Supreme Court lifted the November 4th stay, allowing ballots received from affected voters by 5 p.m. on November the 8th to be counted. Now, the Georgia Supreme Court is ordering the RNC and the Georgia Republican Party to file a letter explaining why they should not be sanctioned in this case, which is a little bit different from like, oh, no, you were denied, right? So the Georgia Supreme Court wrote, quote, on November 2nd, 2024, appellants Republican National Committee, RNC, and Georgia Republican Party, Inc., the GRP, filed an emergency motion for supersedious. That motion represented to this court that, quote, the Superior Court entered an interlocutory injunction on November 1st, 2024. Appellants timely noticed an appeal that day, unquote. Later, in that same motion, appellants stated that, quote, they timely noticed an appeal on November 1st, 2024. However, the appellate record transmitted to this court indicates that appellant's notice of appeal was not filed in the trial court until November 4th, 2024 at 11:50 p.m.
Whoops.
Just, if you a little day here, day there, hour here, hour there.
That's more days late. That's more days late than they had to vote. So, again, the Georgia Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of Georgia then continues, upon consideration of these facts, appellants RNC, GRP, and their counsel of record are ordered to file a letter brief addressing the discrepancy between their representations and the appellate record with respect to when their notice of appeal was filed, and showing cause as to why appropriate sanctions, if any, should not be considered as to either, or rather, it should not be considered as to each party's counsel of record, or both. And as an attorney, which I'm not, it's one thing when the court is like yelling about the parties, but when they start talking specifically about the counsels to the party, the people who are actually representing them, saying, hey, not only the person you represent, but you lawyer, you yourself, right?
Show me reason why you should not be sanctioned. This is a pretty serious business.
And this isn't hey, you made a clerical error. Don't do that again. This is hey, you misrepresented facts in your filing twice in this one filing. You need to now write me a letter and tell me why we shouldn't sanction you. And that's a big deal. It's from the Georgia Supreme Court. So we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, which is also kind of saying we really think we're going to sanction you, so give us a reason why we should.
Yeah, unless you have some sort of compelling reason in your letter, you're probably going to get some sanctions slapped on you. And we'll talk about that. So we have just your Rudy update left. I know it's, we're almost an hour into this episode, but we do have a Rudy update. So hang in there. We have to take a quick break. Stick around.
Hey, welcome back. Our final new patrons to thank this week include Joanna Berry, Mary T, GW in the PNW, Sean Stores, and aiming for top MFs per hour. I'm trying, but you have to tune in to the given the cabinet appointments, we might hit the high rate for MFs this Friday, but we'll see. So, as is the favorite holiday tradition, let's wrap up this with an update on Rudy Giuliani. Before we get to the Ruby Freeman and Shea Moss case, don't forget the Dominion voting machines also sued Rudy for defamation, and we have an update on that case first. So it's a double up on Rudy. It's 2 for Tuesday, even though we're on Wednesday. But let's start this from Law and Crime. Rudy Giuliani's legal woes continued to worsen this week. On the heels of his bankruptcy attorneys seeking to quit, Colorado Appeals Court on Thursday handed down a significant victory to a former Dominion voting systems executive, allowing him to proceed with a defamation lawsuit against the former New York City mayor over baseless claims about rigging the 2020 election. The ruling was issued by a 3-judge panel on the Colorado Court of Appeals, and the reasoning mirrored the court's earlier decision to allow Eric Coomer to go forward with defamation suits against Donald Trump's 2020 campaign and Kraken lawyer Sidney Powell, amongst others. Giuliani was among the defendants named in Coomer's initial lawsuit, but was granted a stay of appeal for himself because he was in the throes of bankruptcy proceedings in Manhattan. Giuliani, during a November 19th, 2020 press conference on supposed election fraud, referred to Coomer as a, quote, vicious man who was, quote, close to Antifa. And Rudy also claimed Coomer, quote, specifically said that they're going to fix this election, unquote. Now, in late December 2020, 1 month after the election, and a matter of days before January 6, Dr. Eric Coomer, formerly the Director of Product Strategy and Security for Dominion Voting Systems, filed a lawsuit in Denver County against Donald Trump's campaign, 2 right-wing cable news networks, and a collection of Trump-allied election deniers, claiming that the defendants conspired to defame him and intentionally inflicted severe emotional distress by falsely accusing him of being a, quote, anonymous Antifa activist, unquote, hell-bent on ensuring the former president was not going to win the election.
Interesting. They make those accusations quite a bit, don't they, Pete? Sound familiar? All right, so Giuliani moved to have this dismissed, claiming that Coomer, by the way, I want to just note, really kind of buried in the first line of that story, Rudy's bankruptcy lawyers in the Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman case have quit. They've quit the case, saying he's just impossible to work with. So that's just a fun little side note. But Giuliani wanted this case dismissed, Dominion, claiming Coomer couldn't show his statements were made with actual malice or knowing disregard for the truth. He also filed a declaration attesting that he believed the statements he made at the press conference regarding Coomer were true. I thought they were true at the time. The panel reasoned that at this stage of the litigation, Coomer is not required to prove falsity or actual malice in Giuliani's statements. He's merely required to show a reasonable probability that he'll be able to meet his burden of proof by clear and convincing evidence at trial. And the court reasoned that Coomer had met that burden. You have. And in analyzing the alleged falsity of Giuliani's prior statements, the ruling emphasizes that Coomer's own declaration unambiguously refutes Giuliani's claims. Quote, Coomer has shown a reasonable likelihood of proving by clear and convincing evidence that these statements were false. That's what the 3-judge panel said. Most importantly, in his declaration, Coomer attested that he, 1, did not participate in the alleged conference call, 2, did not say he could rig the election, and 3, did not take any action to subvert the election. That declaration, if true, could itself provide clear and convincing evidence that Giuliani's statements were false. And in analyzing whether Giuliani's claims could be construed as being made with actual malice, which is the higher bar, the panel reasoned that based on the evidence available, quote, there is a reasonable likelihood that a jury could find that Giuliani at a minimum entertained serious doubts as to its truth. The court also noted Giuliani never advanced any theory as to how Coomer could have possibly rigged the election, and that his allegedly defamatory claims were made after the government agency responsible for election security had rejected any claim that the election had been compromised. The panel remanded the case back to the district court to continue proceedings. So that's what's going on with Dominion. This court says, we think that Dominion will be able to win this case against Rudy, so it may go forward. He can prove falsity and actual malice later.
Like the carnival Ferris wheel operator, or I guess, little spinny machine operator, when you say, kids, do you want to go faster? Kids, do you want more Rudy? Yes, we want more Rudy. Let's turn to an update in the Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss case. You'll recall that Freeman and Moss wrote to the judge in the case and said Rudy had failed to turn over his assets to the receivership within the 7-day period that the court mandated, and that he was hiding his assets. The judge held a hearing and ordered Rudy to turn over the Mercedes that he showed up driving in Palm Beach on Election Day, and threatened Rudy with contempt if he didn't start complying with the court's order. Now, happy to say that The Guardian reports the following. Rudy Giuliani has relinquished dozens of watches and a Mercedes once owned by movie star Lauren Bacall to two former Georgia election workers who won a $148 million defamation judgment against him, his lawyer said. Joseph Camarata said in a letter filed late on Friday in Manhattan federal court that the trove of watches and a ring were delivered by FedEx to a bank in Atlanta, Georgia in the morning. The 1980 Mercedes-Benz SL 500 was turned over at an address in Hialeah, Florida, and an undisclosed amount of funds from Giuliani's Citibank accounts were also surrendered to the two women who won the judgment, according to the letter. Camarata called Giuliani, quote, a victim of political persecution in an email, and said that this month's election demonstrated Americans were tired of what he called, quote, witch hunts, indictments, impeachments, prosecutions, convictions, civil cases, and judgments, unquote. Camarata, in his Friday letter, also asked to delay Giuliani's January trial over the disposition of some of his assets, including his property in Palm Beach, so that he can... Got to delay it, much like, remember last week we talked about how they needed, Giuliani couldn't make it to trial or to court, that the judge ordered
and there were no
because
microphones
he needed
in New
a
York?
podcast and there are no suitable facilities to tape a podcast because Rudy Giuliani demands the best in audio equipment. Well, this time, in the Friday letter sent by his attorney, Camarata, he asked the judge to delay the January trial to allow for Giuliani to attend President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration.
Yep.
So I would hope, on the heels of this just extraordinarily display of bad faith behavior on the part of Giuliani, that the judge says, sorry, no. The trial is going to begin when I said it.
Perhaps if he didn't have a pitch a fit about showing up to the hearing, the judge might have been like, okay, cool. But no, once you, turn your, display your absolute disdain and disregard for rule of law and professionalism in the courts, you're not going to get your asks granted.
Do you know who gets to go to Trump's inauguration? People who aren't scheduled for trial about crimes they allegedly committed.
To turn over their apartments.
Of the 350 million Americans out there, 349,900,000 and probably 50,000 or so are free to go to Trump's inauguration because they don't have to go to trial over crimes
I'm not going to be on
allegedly
trial
committed.
in January, but I will not be attending the inauguration. So,
but if you wanted to, you could. Unlike Rudy Giuliani,
right.
hopefully, when the judge says no, get yourself down here to trial and show up. But yes, Lauren Bacall's Mercedes no longer belongs to Rudy Giuliani. And I would bid good money to drive around Atlanta, wherever we get, I don't know what, I'm sure they're restrictive, the open container laws. It's not like we could drive around with a bottle of open champagne and toast the city, but to drive around with Shaye and Ruby in the back seat of that convertible, an enormous amount of money could be raised in a fundraiser or directly for
so
them,
too.
because they will never. That's the other
Collect
thing. Like this, everybody says like, "Oh,
right?
it's an amazing judgment." They're not going to collect the huge, overwhelming portion of that. So, support them and give them what they deserve. But I'm happy for them.
Yeah, once they get the Palm Beach apartment, they have the New York apartment. I think we should have a party. It's just my 2 cents. I'll go to that. I won't go to the inauguration, but I'll go to the Freeman Moss party at what is it, 4566th or something like that in New York. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening. Welcome to all of our new listeners. Thanks to all of our new patrons. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate you trusting us to bring you this news and these updates. And thanks to all of the amazing journalists that contribute to as sources to these shows. We really appreciate you too. We'll be back in your ears this weekend for a bonus episode and back with you next week. And like I said, maybe as we record this, you might have gotten an update on the Judge Merchan 34 felony counts case. Again, if you didn't get an update, that means we don't have an update, and we'll bring it to you later. But thanks anyway. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Strzok.
Cleanup on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.